Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Matt Continetti joins me. He is, of course, part of the commentary podcasting fraternity that I listen to every morning. He's at the American Enterprise Institute, the Washington Free Beacon, and a friend of the program. Matt, good Friday to you. A lot to cover. I want to start, though, with yesterday's commentary podcast. Thanks for the shout-out, along with Turley and McCarthy and those of us who opine about the law. But I want to push back a little bit against you guys. You're hesitant to talk about con law. There are real lawyers like Andy and Turley. They're prosecutors and defense counsel, and that's a world unto themselves. Then there are civil litigation experts, and I do endangered species and clean water, and that's technical stuff. But con law is not supposed to be reserved for lawyers. It's supposed to be, it was written by farmers, for a citizenry that's supposed to understand it. I'm a little bit leery of pundits pulling back from having opinions on the Constitution because we're all supposed to understand it. Do you get my point?
I do, and I agree. The Constitution is for all of us, and it's easily accessible, and you can read it with a simple Google search, and so it shouldn't stop us from having opinions. I do think in some of these controversies, Hugh, surrounding the deportations, surrounding immigration issues, you can go from a general constitutional standpoint to the niceties and details of statutes very quickly. And so that's why it's incumbent on people who comment and analyze the news to take in a broad set of perspectives and try to think through these issues themselves.
Yeah, whenever I hear someone start spouting off precedents on air and Youngstown Sheet and Tube or Dames and More or this or that or Bemidine, I think to myself, no, tell me what you're really saying. Are you saying the president has the authority to do this or not? Because that's what it comes down to. And on this question of the deportation, I spent an hour last night with my old boss at the White House in the Reagan Council's era, talking about the fact that in that era, Ted Olson would have come over from the Department of Justice and sat down with Fred Fielding, and they would have pulled up the future Chief Justice, who was an associate counsel. They would have left me down doing the minor scrub work, but they would have talked about this for a long time. Do you think there's a legal team with a legal strategy that is full of serious people plotting this out?
I think there's definitely serious people both in the White House and at DOJ and at DHS who are thinking through the various ways in which they can solve the immigration crisis in this country, a crisis that really culminated under Joe Biden's open border for 4 years. And so they're taking different approaches. And that's why I think we have to often be very particular about what we're talking about. So there's the case, of course, of Mahmoud Khalil, the Columbia graduate student who was involved in the pro-Hamas activity on Columbia's campus. And so that's one deportation proceeding. Then, of course, there's the really kind of electric case involving some 250 members of the Tren de Aragua gang who were flown out of the country to El Salvador and the fight with Judge Boasberg. That's a separate issue. And so we have to kind of think, all right, is the administration following one strategy when they're taking away visas, trying to deport students who are engaged in anti-Semitic conduct on campus? And what's that strategy? And then what's the strategy with the Alien Enemies Act, which the administration invoked on these 3 flights of the Venezuelans to El Salvador? And is that going to be a long-term strategy? So we just have to take one at a time, I think.
I agree with that. I am a little bit nervous that a lot of plates are being juggled and balls are in the air at one time, and that something could drop. And I use as my worst case scenario that the Venezuelans are being sent to El Salvador where they might be disappeared by a rival gang. We don't want to send people to their death, right? We don't rendition people to justice systems that aren't justice systems. I don't think that happened here. And Secretary Rubio told me that he discussed it with President Bukele. But we really don't want to be in the business of sending people in the country illegally to, say, Argentinians junta in the 70s, right?
As a matter of principle, no. Also, you want to know who you're sending.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Who you're deporting. I want to start there. And I think one of the points of controversy in this case is we're still not entirely. We have some of the names of the people on the flights, but we're still not entirely clear where were they in the immigration process. Had they already gone through due process? Had they already been found to be illegally residing in the country? Did we know that that they were gang members? Once we have those facts, I think we'll be able to see that the law is on the Trump administration side as well as the politics.
Yeah, Judge Boasberg is asking for details like that as we speak. It'll be an interesting weekend in that court. I'm not going anywhere. Matt Continetti's not going anywhere. Stay tuned. I'm back with Matt Continetti now. Matt Continetti, I'm curious as to where are you? You look like you're in the holding room of The Wire. You got this calendar behind you, and where are you?
AEI. This is my AEI office. So there's not as many books visible as is the case when I come to you from my home office. But yes,
well, I'm very glad to see AEI is not wasting its budget on interior decoration. It really does look like
behind me, Hugh. It's multi-use. Behind me, that blank space is actually a whiteboard where I could, if I wanted to, pull out a dry erase marker and jot down all my ideas. So we have a lot of different ways to come up with our ideas here at the American.
I'll tell you right now, you could be a Stasi agent in the basement of a dilapidated Berlin walk-up right now, listening to the people upstairs. So I would send that to you. All right, second topic, Matt. Secretary Rubio is my guest for the first time in this capacity as Secretary of State this week. And we began with China and we ended with China. And he said the story of the 21st century will be China. To me, it's the number one story. And a question occurred to me that I want to pose to you. Do you think Xi is telling Putin what to do and not do in Russia?
I'm not sure if he's explicit. I think that there is a understanding between Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin. I think they get along very well. Putin views Xi as a patron in many ways, as a source of technology, as a source of economic support. And I think Xi Jinping views Vladimir Putin as the attack dog, as someone who is taking explicit kinetic steps to disrupt the American-led international system. And when you look at some of the rhetoric that comes from Xi Jinping, he talks about this unlimited partnership between the People's Republic of China and the Russian Federation. And he also has said that there are things happening in the world today that have not happened in 100 years. And so I don't know if he's telling Vladimir Putin what to do exactly, but I do think that he's very supportive of Vladimir Putin. And of course, it's not just China and Russia. As you know, Hugh, Iran is an integral partner in this new axis of aggressors, supplying China with energy and also Russia with drones and missiles.
And I also wonder, I can't imagine that the North Koreans would be in Russia without Xi's approval. Do you think that could have happened without Xi giving a green light?
You know, again, I'm sure he was aware of it. I've been researching this angle myself over the years. It's still unclear to me, Hugh, how much authority China has over North Korea. The Kim family, as we know, is very eccentric, very erratic, and I think sometimes they make moves. Kim Jong-un makes moves that even might rattle Xi Jinping's cage, as surprising as that might sound.
Please stand by. We're coming right back on the network with Matt Continetti.
In a white room with black curtains near the stage.
Welcome back, America. We're playing music from Matt Continetti's prison cell. Can you hear it, Matt? The White Room. We really think we got to get you some. We got to get you some drapes or
get
something.
A backdrop or something. Yeah.
All right. So let me talk to you a little bit about a political issue. I listened to the Ruthless podcast yesterday, and they talked about the fact that Democrats are almost automatically taking the 20 side of every 80-20 issue. And they're now caught in an iron triangle of gender radicalism, support for domestic terrorism, whether it's Tesla terrorists or Hamas supporters, and climate justice extremism. They're really trapped, so that Chuck Schumer, you know, he's on The View looking like a fool, but what has happened to the Democrats? Do they have a way out of this trap? They're trapped on the left, I think. What's your assessment of that assessment?
No, I think the Democrats are headed potentially for a McGovern moment, just as after the 1968 election and Nixon's great comeback, the Democrats were pulled in many directions over the war in Vietnam, over the rise in the counterculture, and inability to cope with Nixon's popularity and his message of law and order. They eventually nominate George McGovern, who was far to the left of the American mainstream 4 years later in 1972. I think we're seeing something like that develop on the Democratic side today, Hugh, where Democrats clearly are just beginning to recognize the defeat in 2024, and their response, rather than acceptance or modification, is a huge tantrum, is anger. And you see that in these town halls. These town halls, the ones in the Republican districts, are left-wingers who are organized shouting at Republicans. But the ones in the Democratic districts are the Democratic voters shouting at the Democrats for not fighting hard enough. And to look at the response to Chuck Schumer after he made the right decision and the responsible decision, and the politically smart decision, I'd add, to not shut the government down last week, you see that the two most prominent faces on the Democratic side today are Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. All of the type of low-grade domestic terrorism that you mentioned, Tesla, the environmental radicalism. This is a party, I think, that's headed in exactly the wrong direction it needs to be if it wants to get its act together for 2026.
I have a proposition that I want to test out on you. They lost the media when they lost X. When Elon got a hold of X, X is actually the spinal cord of information distribution in the United States. Lots of people get information from lots of places. I listen to your podcast every morning at Commentary. I listen to National Review. I read Ellis Items, Wall Street Journal, Financial Times. But X tells me a lot. Signal and noise, obviously. But when the left lost control of the ability to control the flow of information, they lost the script. What do you think of my proposition?
Yeah, and I think there's something to it, and it's not just Elon Musk obtaining X and owning it and turning it into this free speech forum. It's also the Twitter files, him going back and talking about the social media giants' collusion with the government to censor viewpoints, especially with COVID. And I would point to COVID, too, as another factor where the Democrats just lost it in two directions. One, COVID, the pandemic summer was the summer of George Floyd, and the reaction to the death of George Floyd sent the Democrats in a radical direction on race issues and crime, in handling crime. And then two, the COVID was a moment of radical transparency for American parents to see what's happening inside the American education system, and American parents were horrified. And so there, too, the Democrats and liberals lost a lot of their legitimacy because American families were saying, you're indoctrinating our kids. And by the way, they're getting dumber anyway.
Matt, have you seen, I told my audience that I'd be covering this next week. I just want to know if you know of the case of Foote versus Ludlow School District. It's a First Circuit opinion, 3-0 per curiam opinion, came down a month ago out of the Massachusetts First Circuit Court. It covers New England. And it dismissed a parent's claim for damages after they had instructed the teacher, the superintendent, everybody by mail not to do gender with their daughter. The school concealed a gender transition. I mean, they concealed it. It's Soviet-style East German taking control of your kids, and it's a mutiny because the First Circuit, these three judges, two Biden judges with a total of maybe 4 years experience and an Obama judge, they simply reject long-standing, you have to believe me on this, long-standing settled black law precedent on the right of parents to control their children's education. The two cases called Meyer and Pierce. They mutiny. They reject it. And it's also one of the worst written opinions I've ever seen. Do you think maybe the resistance has moved into robes?
Yeah. Well, I had heard about that case, Hugh, because I'm a loyal listener of this program. So you educated me in that case earlier this week. I think I had heard about it in the news as well. it's a sign that the judges, especially the judges that Obama and Biden put in, have a very radical view of their role. Their role is not to actually get the law right. Their role is to create new law, and to create new law that's in alignment with the radical agenda of the progressive left. And so I think when voters see this and are confronted with these facts, they react very negatively. And this is why I think the Trump administration understands that its current fight with Judge Boasberg in the DC Circuit Court is politically advantageous, even if legally it may be somewhat tenuous. And it's because most Americans say, look, we put Donald Trump in office for two reasons: get prices lower and clean out the country of the criminal illegal aliens who flooded in during Biden's open border. And the public's willing to give Trump a lot of leeway to do that. If these judges are seen to get in the way, then I think you're going to have political consequences coming from Congress. And I would hope eventually that the Supreme Court would step in on these national injunctions as well.
I think they will. I've got one more question from Matt Continetti, which will be off the air, and I will play it for you later, and it will be on the Big Weekend Pod. Don't go anywhere, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. You're listening to the Friday edition of the Hugh Hewitt Show. I am back with Matt Continetti. Matt, I have one more question. I had Seth Mandel, your colleague from the Commentary podcast, on yesterday, and I asked him point blank, I'm not Jewish. I follow Israel because they're our strategic ally, the equal of any in the world, and they're a free country in the Middle East, and they're part of the alliance of good guys. But my gosh, it's very unsettling they actually have a constitutional crisis. They've got crazy stuff going on, and they've got a war going on. Are you worried about the stability of the Jewish state?
I'm slightly worried. I think I was a little bit worried more during the crisis over the proposed judicial reform prior to October 7th, 2023. Israeli politics is always very chaotic, and Israel's always facing threats. So those two conditions haven't really changed, though I do agree that it's becoming intense now on the domestic front. But I think overall, I think Israel has a great moment here to seize the opportunity to finally call out Hamas for dragging its feet during the ceasefire, to take the fight back to Hamas, to try to use force in order to get Hamas to release the remaining living hostages. And we also know now that Israel has the green light from the United States of America. We saw Trump order the attacks on the Houthis in Yemen, which are still ongoing, and then the resumption of the war in Gaza. And I think this is good for both countries. It makes the world safer. And I think it's also the prelude to the showdown with Iran in the coming weeks.
In the coming, that's I would not be surprised, Matt, by the time we talk next week or the week thereafter, if Donald Trump has pulled the trigger on Iran, because I think he's about had it. Would you be surprised if that happens?
No, I don't know the exact timing, of course, but we know from his letter to the Ayatollah that he said, this is your make or break moment. You're either going to come in and begin proposing a negotiation that would lead to the actual verified end of your nuclear program, or you're going to face consequences. And I also thought that Trump's statement in relation to the Houthis earlier this week is very important as well, because he was saying these operations against the Houthi militia, which has shut down shipping in the Red Sea, are ongoing. And he warned Iran. He said, if we see you supplying them, we're going to take out your naval vessels as well. So he's putting Iran
I think
on
we're
notice,
at that cusp.
It's about time.
We'll check back next Friday. Matt Continetti, thank you. Follow him on X at Continetti. Listen to him on the Commentary Podcast.